Our top focus at this hour, the NATO summit has concluded, and with this, the Western military alliance has once again propped itself on a Cold War footing. The meet ended with the Western Security Alliance strengthening its defense against Russian aggression by warning of global challenges posed by Russia, and lastly, inviting neutral countries like Finland and Sweden into the group. Calling the meet historic, US President Joe Biden addressed the media and promised additional $800 million aid to Ukraine and vowed of unwavering support to the embattled nation. Listen in.
We're going to be providing another, well, I guess I'll announce it shortly, but another $800 million in aid, as long as it takes, so Russia cannot, in fact, defeat Ukraine and move beyond Ukraine. This is a critical position for the world. Here we are. Why do we have NATO? I told Putin that, in fact, if he were to move, we would move to strengthen NATO. We would move to strengthen NATO across the board.
Now, there were several highlights to the three-day meet, but the biggest outcomes were the leaders agreeing to a new strategic concept, strengthening forces in Europe by mid-2023, and a go-ahead for Finland and Sweden to join the alliance. Speaking on which, French President Emmanuel Macron said that pushing the two historically neutral countries towards NATO proves that Putin's strategy is wrong. If the accession is approved by all 30 member nations, then NATO will get a new 1,300-kilometer border with Russia. NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg has said that it's up to the two countries to walk down the NATO path, while vowing to defend every inch of NATO territory. Stoltenberg also warned of a possibly worse situation going forward. Listen in.
At the same time, we also know that this can get worse. Because if this becomes a full-scale war between Russia and NATO, then we'll see suffering, damage, death, destruction at a scale which is much worse than what we see in Ukraine today.
And reacting to all of this, Russian President Vladimir Putin has said that Russia does not have a problem with the two countries being a part of the alliance until NATO troops are deployed on its soil. And if that happens, then Putin warned of a mirror response. Now, before the summit, the biggest hurdle to Finland and Sweden's entry to NATO was Turkey. Ankara was angered by Stockholm's support for Kurdish militants and arms embargo on it. But through the summit, it gave its approval for their accession. Listen in.
Müttefiklerimizden sözde değil, eylemlerinde de hakiki bir dayanışma beklediğimiz mesajını güçlü biçimde vurguladım.
However, there is a twist in the tale. Erdogan told Finland and Sweden that he could still block their drives to join NATO if they fail to implement a new deal with Ankara. The warning comes just 2 days after Turkey agreed to lift deal-breaking objections to Sweden and Finland's NATO accession. Meanwhile, many of member nations said that they will be increasing their defense budget as well and revamping military capabilities in the years to come.
We need to invest for the long term in vital capabilities like future combat air, while simultaneously adapting to a more dangerous and more competitive world. And the logical conclusion of the investments on which we propose to embark, of these decisions, is that we will reach 2.5% of GDP on defence by the end of the decade.
The German army furthermore will always keep an additional combat-ready armoured division with 15,000 soldiers for the defence of northeastern Europe, with 60 planes and up to 20 maritime units.
The war in Ukraine has triggered an energy crisis across the world. There is increased pressure on countries to contain the subsequent inflation. The US had increased production from its reserves since the war broke out. Next month, Biden is supposed to visit Saudi Arabia, on which the American president said that he will meet the Saudi prince but will not directly push for oil. It was not just Russia, but NATO members also highlighted the role of China in playing, which is constantly evolving the geopolitical situation right now? Listen in.
Un des points que nous allons régler à très court terme, qui est une des conséquences de la situation, c'est le sujet des engrais et autres fertiliseurs dont ont besoin beaucoup de ces pays, et nous sommes en train d'apporter une réponse technique en lien avec en particulier la FAO, les Nations Unies, pour pouvoir justement faciliter soit des solutions de substitution, soit l'acheminement de ces engrais qui sont indispensables apparemment à beaucoup de pays membres du G20 ou pays membres de l'Union africaine.
While there were 3 days of serious talks and charting the alliance's position and responsibilities in future, there were also a few goof-ups, like when US President Joe Biden said that Switzerland is joining NATO. Listen in.
We got the telephone. He suggested we call the leader of Switzerland. Switzerland, my goodness, I'm getting really anxious here about expanding NATO. Sweden. And what happened was, we got on the phone and she asked if she could come the next day to want to talk about joining NATO.